Welcome to Casa San Ysidro. We wish you could be here, but for now, join us on this virtual tour. The Alameda Land Grant was an 89,000-acre parcel of land situated on the west bank of the Rio Grande. In 1710, King Philip IV of Spain gave the grant to Francisco Montes Vigil, who later sold it to Captain Juan Gonzalez of the Spanish Army. The grant included farmland along the Rio Grande that was later known as Rosalía de Corrales in 1762. The Gutiérrez family name dates back to the late 17th century. In 1693, Felipe Gutiérrez, a soldier in Diego de Vargas's army, had returned to New Mexico after having fled during the Pueblo Revolt of 1680. In 1710, Felipe was given a parcel of land for his services in the Reconquista. By 1868, the extended Gutiérrez family had owned a large tract of land with homes scattered throughout Corrales. The home, now referred to as Casa San Ysidro, was built around 1875. As merchants and property owners in the village, the family would rent the home out to various descendants before it was purchased by Ward Allen Minge and Shirley Jolly Minge in the early 1950s. The Minges spent nearly half a century renovating and preserving the Gutiérrez house. During that time, they assembled a collection of architecture, furniture, religious art, and more, all dating to the colonial, territorial, and early American periods of New Mexico. The collection is now considered to be one of the most comprehensive of its kind in the Southwest. While earning his degree from UNM, Allen worked as a contract historian for many of the pueblos. He later went on to become chief historian for Kirtland Air Force Base's Weapons Laboratory, while Shirley served as a colonel in the Army. The Mingeses have been credited with having the foresight to collect and preserve utilitarian items that otherwise would have been destroyed or lost to time, as preservation was little understood or encouraged at the time. The Gutiérrez Minge House is located at the edge of the irrigated Rio Grande Valley, surrounded by fields, orchards, a 19th century church, and many houses built within the same period. The Gutiérrez family built the original 4 rooms of the casa with provincial Greek revival detailing. The architectural style, otherwise known as territorial in New Mexico, was common during the mid-late 19th century. Greek revival developed as Eastern U.S. decorative cultural influences made their way into New Mexico to be incorporated into homes. In 1953, Ward Allen and Shirley Jolly Minge purchased the house and began renovating it during the following year. Between 1961 and 1971, the Mingeses built a speculative recreation of a Spanish rancho that incorporated salvaged wooden architectural elements and structural details. These salvaged pieces were collected from demolished and deteriorated buildings dating back to the Spanish, Mexican, and early American eras of New Mexico. The Mingeses' romantic recreation not only shapes a proper scene for their historic architectural and artifact collection, but creates an historic interpretation through its sequence, scale, and proportion. The inclusion of a central hallway became popular in residential designs during the late 1860s following the Civil War. They were patterned after a style used in constructing officers' quarters during expansion. Other examples can be seen in Fort Union, north of Las Vegas, New Mexico, and in Fort Marcy, located in Santa Fe. The concept was adopted from the dog run style of large homes in the southeastern United States. The milled lumber, squared beams, and paneled boards from the ceiling were salvaged from the Los Lunas area, which reflect construction implemented after the railroad was built. Highlights from the collection in this space include a colonial harinero, or 6-plank chest that dates back to 1690. The chest features almost no iron. It was made with dovetail construction. This tin chandelier, affectionately known as the araña, was made in 1890 from tin cans salvaged from a dance hall at Ranchitos near Taos. This processional tin frame, made by renowned tinsmith Higinio Gonzalez, features 2 straps on its back meant for carrying in ceremony. When the Mingueses found the house, it was owned by Bruna and Inés Gutiérrez and was rented out to the Berry family. At the time, the Berrys had been using the dining room as a bedroom. In 1954, Allen added a salvaged 1870s double-hung window to the space before knocking out the south wall to incorporate a lower kitchen. Friend and carpenter for the Mingueses, Pete Smith, added pine wood flooring with butterfly joints over the original packed earth floor. In addition, the interior walls are finished in a colorful pink mud wash gifted from Acoma Pueblo for the work Allen had conducted with the tribe. Highlights from the collection in this space include a trastero, or upright cabinet, built in 1810 that was collected in Monticello. The cabinet is hand-adzed and contains its original iron lock and snipe hinges. These two chairs were carved in the 1840s by a skilled carpintero that likely worked out of a workshop in Cochiti, Pueblo. These chairs are representative of the type of carpentry taught to Pueblos. As his first addition to the house, Allen built the lower kitchen to use for daily heat and cooking. This addition was also Allen's first attempt at adobe construction. After some help from his neighbor, this initial construction provided Allen with the basics for his career in restoring the walls of Casa over the next 20 years. Highlights from the collection in this space include a late 18th century caso, or copper pot, used for catching water, washing, cooking, and dyeing fabrics in. This 1840s Velarde chest is one of about 18 to still exist in New Mexico today. The Valdez family was famous for their craftsmanship in chip-carved chests. This one was acquired from the Chavez family in Belen. The upper kitchen was built in the 1890s as an additional bedroom for Napoleon and Rosaura Gutierrez's family. They lived in the house until 1905, before it was occupied by Constancio Candelaria. Allen Minge had transformed this space to incorporate lamps from the 1970s, a 1930s backsplash, as well as a range, stove, and oven. This colonial trastero, or storage cabinet, was made in 1790 with two hand-adzed pine doors, each with openings for ventilation guarded by hand-turned spindles. Trasteros like this one were made for keeping food and dishes. Traces of yellow, black, red, and green paint on the spindles indicate that there may have been a more elaborate painting on this piece at one time. The trastero was collected north of San Juan Pueblo near Alcalde, New Mexico. This blue enamel wood stove, made by the Heinz Company in 1890, was collected from Jose B. Ortega in Chimayo, New Mexico. The stove was brought by railroad to Leimi and then by wagon to Chimayo. A 3-day celebration was held for the villagers upon its arrival, the first of its kind in Chimayo. This room, deemed the parlor, was part of the original 1875 house. During Allen and Shirley's first weeks of living in the casa, the parlor was used as their living quarters. Later in their occupancy, the parlor was decorated in Allen's Victorian family furniture. Victorian-style furniture was imported via the railroad as more Anglo-incomers settled in the area. Wealthier families would have kept a room like this as a reception area, not as an ostentatious display of money, but to treat their guests in a lavish manner. The room is representative of the early railroad period in New Mexico. In 1878, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway Company became the first railroad to enter New Mexico. And by the late 1890s, it controlled more than half of the track miles in the territory. To coat the walls, Allen used a clay pigment found in Jemez called La Bajada Red. This bedroom, also a part of the original 1875 structure, contains its original pine and aspen vigas and latillas. When Allen and Shirley first found the casa, the room was being used by the Berry family as a kitchen. The wooden cabinets, installed around 1935, now hold much of the Mingueses' pottery collection. Allen coated this room with a Placitas gold clay pigment and white lime gesso, while Shirley painted a motif around the room inspired from a San Ildefonso redware jar made by Tonita Roybal. Highlights from the collection in this space include 19th century metal window grills made from old wagon wheel rims. These 2 window grills are part of a set of 4 that originally protected liquor in a cantina in Puerto de Luna. This 18th century petaca, made from cowhide, was used for transporting small personal items while traveling long distances. These boxes were great for traveling because they weren't too rigid and were flexible. This bedroom was an addition to the house built sometime in the early 1920s. The room was constructed with terrones, or sod bricks, which are more substantial than adobe bricks. To coat the walls, Allen used a clay pigment found just south of Laguna Pueblo called Dripping Springs Green. The furniture in this room reflects local interpretations of neoclassical and American Empire designs. American Empire furniture comes from the French-inspired neoclassical style of American furniture design. This type of furniture originates from the Empire style introduced during the First French Empire period under Napoleon's rule and gained its greatest popularity in the U.S. after 1820. As an early 19th century design movement in the United States, it encompassed architecture, furniture, and other decorative visual arts. Highlights from the collection in this space include a 19th century bed, chair, and cradle from Chacon, New Mexico, all created in light of American Empire style furniture. The Empire style manifested itself in a variety of ways in New Mexican cabinet making. All 3 of these items were a local craftsman's interpretation. A plazuela is a traditional courtyard enclosed within rancho-style homes that provided space for families to garden and do routine work. For the Mingueses, it served as a kitchen garden where apple trees, black currants, and roses were grown. The first addition Allen had built outside of the original Gutiérrez house was a library that made up part of a west wing for the plazuela. Foundations for the north and south wings had to be built up simultaneously with the west wing to interlock corners and furnish support for wooden architectural elements. Tony Garcia found the portal dismantled on the Abeita family's property in Isleta. The family was willing to sell it after they had remodeled their ancient adobe home. The structure included hand-worked wooden vigas, corbels, and uprights that dated back sometime between 1750 and 1775. The brick covering the Galeria and Plazuela floors were collected from a few different sites around Albuquerque. Donke Brick Factory began manufacturing in 1924 and was abandoned after it closed in 1942. Allen collected much of this brick for the Plazuela from the site. After discovering his German heritage, Allen took a trip to Germany where he found this pattern. This arrangement was designed to let grass grow through openings in the brick to create the look of a lawn and control erosion. Other bricks found on the property include Alvarado brick, Kinney brick, and bricks from the penitentiary south of Santa Fe. Sometime between 1952 and 1954, Allen and Pete had discovered what had appeared to be old foundation stones during their preparation for constructing the library. The stones formed straight lines in places, suggesting that there had once been a compound or buildings surrounding a compound. An archaeological survey conducted in 1984 concluded that artifact samples collected from the property indicated the presence of a prehistoric glaze AD component of 14th-15th century affinity, as well as a post-revolt reoccupation of an early 19th century establishment. Allen and Pete's discovery of the stones, in turn, inspired the South Wing's construction. The library was assembled with ancient hand-squared vigas that Tony Garcia found on a ranch near Casablanca and the Pueblo of Laguna. He also found a fireplace mantle in Coyote and an alacena in Ranchos de Taos. Albuquerque architect George Pearl presented a federal-style doorway with original glass panes that he had found on an abandoned Luna family adobe house in Los Lunas. A saguan refers to a central passageway that leads from a front door to a patio or a courtyard. These entryways are found in historic houses in Mexico and in the southwestern U.S. In Spanish colonial architecture, a gate known as a portón was often placed in the entrance of a saguan. These gates were wide enough for wagons and were typically constructed with a smaller gate that allowed pedestrians to go through. During Alan and Shirley's residency at Casa, they used the eastern saguan as a kitchen plazuela. The saguan was constructed from 1965 to 1970 in order to close off the space between the lower kitchen and the library and incorporate a massive gate collected from the Horace George Longhouse in Ranchos de Taos. Although exact documentation on the Longhouse is lacking, local oral history ascribes the structure originally built as a Spanish fort in the 18th century. Tree ring dates of logs from room number 7 in the house indicate a cutting date of 1816. This date confirms that the structure was, at least partially, built before Long made the fort his home. According to Tony Garcia, neighbors of the house confirm this to be true. The gate was made from pine and cottonwood and contains about 500 colonial wrought iron nails and is fitted with rare iron hinges and a heavy crossbar. In 1962, Allen finished reconstructing a small chapel that's dimensions fit perfectly into the south wing. The pieces he was able to salvage from San Pedro included pine vigas and stained latillas. Allen used beams and corbels that were found at the mission in Tomé and pintle hinge doors salvaged from the Duran family chapel in Talpa near Ranchos de Taos. These 1838 doors provide us with a prime example of Taos Valley woodworking during the Mexican period. Allen finished the chapel in white yeso and la bajada red. Later, Allen painted the rerado, a decorated altarpiece, to complement the collection. This crucificado, carved, painted, and gessoed by José Benito Ortega, dates back to 1890. Ortega is considered to be one of the last prolific pre-revival santeros. Most of his work was done in remote villages near his home in Mora, at a time when the clergy was attempting to replace santos with mass-produced plaster statues. In spite of this, Ortega produced traditional images for chapels, meeting houses, village homes, and the penitentes. Ortega's crude carving of hands and feet contrasts with the complex and distinct touches he gave to facial features. This Mexican period retablo, made by José Rafael Aragón, features San Ysidro Labrador, the patron saint of farming and agriculture. Aragón lived from 1795 to 1862 and was an active artist for nearly 50 years. Aragón's style has been defined by his few sign pieces. His sculptural figures are noted for their decorative motifs, color contrast, delicate features, and graceful proportions. The master bedroom was used by the Minges in the latter half of their residency at Casa San Ysidro. The room was built from 1964 to 1965 with terrones or sod bricks and ceiling materials that came from San Pedro. The room features blue territorial period bed molding, which serve as the beams to support heavy dirt roofing and prevent cracking in adobe walls. While Allen built a fireplace, chimney, and finished roofing, Pete Smith constructed doorways and windows to the room that he copied from the Castillo house in Bernalillo. Tony Garcia had purchased a number of 19th century objects from the Loreto Convent in Santa Fe, including a blue door from Convent's chapel. Allen finished the room with white gesso and a mauve earth pigment found near Cuba. This mid-19th century brass canopy bed once belonged to Governor Manuel Armijo, the last Mexican period governor before the territory was ceded to the U.S. The bed was one of two purchased in Paris, France, with the other belonging to Manuel's brother. Armijo passed it down to the Chavez family in Socorro, which was later found and purchased by Tony Garcia. Chests like this 1810 piece, made in Michoacán, Mexico, were considered to be a status symbol by Spanish traders of the Manila Galleon. The chest was likely used to carry goods along the Camino Real by these traders. Michoacán is known for their tradition of handcrafts and folk art traced back to the Purepecha Empire. This chest uses dovetail construction and features a hand-painted mural of 4 boatmen. The weaving room was constructed from 1965 to 1967 using split cedar, pine decking, and vigas salvaged by George Pearl from a demolished adobe WPA schoolhouse in Belén. Plans for this room included displaying a large loom from Española alongside early textiles. However, Plans were somewhat altered when Tony Garcia had brought Alan hand-ass trojas, or interior bins used for storing grain that he had found near Mora. Alan believed them to date back from 1800 and considered them to be a very rare find. During their residency, the Minges used this room for prepping and storing food for their kitchen, and a music room where Shirley practiced piano. The museum now uses the space to teach lessons in traditional methods of heritage spinning and weaving. The Vigil family loom dates back to 1775 and was collected in Española. Horizontal looms like this one were introduced by the Spanish by the 17th century. By 1822, 71 looms made for weaving wool and cotton existed in Albuquerque. They took at least 2 individuals to make and were typically constructed on site. These looms were made of hand-hewn cottonwood and pine logs and were constructed with minimum iron hardware. They were operated by stepping on treadles, which manipulated the warps to create a variety of fabrics and patterns. To build the Sala Grande, Alan utilized vigas salvaged from a schoolhouse in Belén and corbels and bed molding collected from the church on the plaza in Tomé. The corbels and bed molding are original to the 1739 church and were able to be salvaged since the church was renovated in the 1840s. The corbels are carved to mimic pomegranates, an influence passed down from Moorish tradition, and the bed molding was carved to resemble cordage worn on Franciscan robes. Alan and his father used contemporary cedar latillas to line the roof, while Pete Smith constructed the east doors and windows. The Sala's flagstone floor was given to the Minges as a gift from Acoma Pueblo. Shirley helped complete the floors with chinking to help fill in the gaps. Upon completing the Sala Grande in 1967, Alan, his father Martin, and Shirley's cousin Charles all signed their name on a ceiling plank near the balcony. The balcony door and zambullo door leading into the master bedroom were made in a shop located on top of the convent at Acoma Pueblo. Both doors are dated sometime between 1630 and 1650, more than 30 years before the Pueblo Revolt. The door's structure was given to Alan by members of the Pueblo who determined that if they gave him the pieces, they would always remain there. The balcony itself was found by Tony Garcia, just north of the Pueblo of San Juan. Guard rooms were prevalent in parts of Mexico, so they may have also existed in early New Mexican forts. The Gatekeeper's room was intended to recreate a traditional space where a shepherd might have stayed to keep guard over the saguan. The room was constructed with the vigas collected from the demolished WPA school found in Belén and stray vigas and latillas that Alan had set aside over the years. Beds like this one, arranged atop this structure, would receive warmth from a fire below. Space underneath the bed also gave room to double as a kitchen. Linseed oil and turpentine oil produce a tough, leathery mud floor that is durable within contemporary adobe. Alan and friend Jesus Mendoza gathered earth-rich clay and gunny sacks of chopped wheat straw to mix into the mud slab floor some 10 inches thick. When Alan finished the project, he had left the floor to dry for about 2 months before noticing it had produced a rich green lawn of sprouting wheat. This 19th century straw inlay crucifix is a traditional Spanish art form made to mimic gold inlay. Spanish New Mexican carpinteros used rosin-based glue spread over a wooden surface to apply straw, wood shavings, or corn husks. This glue gave the surface its black color, which highlights the golden color of the applied decoration. Although modeled after and often called inlays, these are actually appliques, as the straw is applied to the surface rather than implanted within it. True inlay work, known as ataracea in 14th century Mexico, was a skill only a master carpenter could acquire. The applique imitation of inlay is found on boxes, tables, crosses, and retablos. The Minge's collection of pottery includes a vast range of Puebloan and 20th century Mexican ceramic. This room highlights pottery from several pueblos, including a late 19th century red, tan, and black hand-coiled polychrome dough bowl from Santo Domingo, a 20th century water canteen from Acoma, a polished black storage jar from Santa Clara, and a 20th century polychrome black and red slip bowl from Santa Ana that was possibly made by Eudora Montoya, a 20th century potter recognized for her efforts in safeguarding traditional knowledge of Santa Ana pottery. The west saguan serves as an entrance to the Corral and provides support for a second-story guest bedroom. Alan built the structure's ceiling with 9 vigas collected from the Vaca House near Peralta. Alan had the portón made to interpret keeping animals in the corral and out of the plazuela. The gate features 18th and 19th century iron, said to have originally come from the Palace of the Governors in Santa Fe. Construction for the Palace of the Governors began in 1618 and served as the seat of the New Mexican government for centuries. The palace is considered the oldest continuously inhabited public building in the United States. The iron nails were collected from Will Prince, who stated that his grandfather, Territorial Governor L. Bradford Prince, had recovered them from the Palace of the Governors during his governorship between 1889 and 1893. Governor Prince was a member of several historical and antiquarian societies in New Mexico, and he wrote several books on New Mexican history before and after his tenure as governor. The inspiration to build a corral extending from the west wing centered on the stone barn. The corral walls were constructed 2 feet thick and 9 feet tall to accommodate despensas, a tack room, stables, a smithy, and a carpentry shop in 1988. That same year, Tony had brought a vintage outhouse with a 2-hole for a child and adult salvaged from Socorro. In 1969, Alan purchased the bunkhouse and cookhouse from Laura Engelbrecht, a descendant of the Griegos, who inherited the buildings and land near Silencio. The stable and horno were constructed last. The despensa's wooden elements and vigas come from Governor Manuel Armijo's ranch house in Lemitar, New Mexico, just a few miles north of Socorro. The structure was used as a despensa or storage room at the ranch and is still used as one at Casa San Ysidro. The stable's open gateway and removable rails meant to house animals were salvaged from Chimayo and date about 1800. The structure now displays prized wagons and farm tools from the 18th and 19th century. This late 19th century wagon was built by the Studebaker Wagon Company, which went on to manufacture automobiles at the turn of the 20th century. The company started making wagons and harnesses in 1852 and ceased auto production in 1966. This specific wagon belonged to Manuel Martinez, whose brother, Padre Antonio José Martinez, was a historically renowned author and priest from Taos, New Mexico. The San Ysidro plow dates sometime around 1850 and is one of the rarest items in the collection. Religious art in New Mexico that depicts San Ysidro often shows him with this particular type of plow featuring a curved handle and no iron parts. The lack of iron parts and heavy use that these plows endured meant that very few of them survived intact to the present day. In fact, this is the only complete San Ysidro plow known to still exist, making it a truly one-of-a-kind addition to the collection. The koa has been used in Mexico and Mesoamerican region by indigenous farmers for centuries. The tool is often associated with harvesting agave plants. Today, agaves are probably best known for producing agave nectar and tequila. However, native peoples of the Southwest and Mesoamerica cultivated the agave as a source of food, drink, clothing, and fiber to make rope and baskets. The Bunkhouse is a building at Casa San Ysidro that is not typical of this area. This 1850s cabin features log and mud construction from the same ranch near Silencio that the stable came from. This structure is staged with artifacts and objects to replicate a bunkhouse for ranch hands and laborers on a large ranch. The collection in this space contains typical items ranch hands would have used during the 19th and early 20th centuries. This deck of cards dates to 1868 and would have been used by workers for entertainment during their time off. The deck features a game called Faro, made popular during the Civil War. Faro was immensely popular in the 19th century because it was easy to learn and offered a fast style of play. A typical game of Faro could be completed in 10 to 15 minutes. However, it was also very easy for the house to rig a game and for players to cheat. Many 19th century books on card games warn that it is nearly impossible to find an honest game of Faro. This tin of Prince Albert tobacco was manufactured in 1907, which is the year that the Prince Albert brand started selling tobacco. National and international brands like this would come to dominate consumer culture in the 20th century. The cookhouse is an outbuilding on a ranchero that would have been used by hired ranch hands as a central location to cook their meals. It would have been placed away from the main house and other structures to limit the possibility of a fire spreading to other buildings. Like the bunkhouse, the cookhouse is made of mud and logs from the same ranch near Silencio that the bunkhouse and stable came from. The artifacts in the cookhouse show some of the ways that life in New Mexico changed when the railroad came to this area around 1880. This trastero, or cabinet from the late 19th century, is very different in construction from earlier trasteros. The cabinet's large panes of glass that were once considered a luxury became an everyday item cheap enough to use in kitchen cabinets. The trastero is held together by ubiquitous commercially manufactured nails opposed to hand-forged nails or joints on traditional pieces. The wood that makes up this trastero was cut and milled by a steam-powered sawmill opposed to being hand-hewn and carved with an adze. All of these differences in method, technique, and technology made furniture much more affordable in the 19th century, but also signaled the decline of local carpentry. By the turn of the 20th century, the railroad made it cheap and easy to bring large quantities of coffee to New Mexico. This coffee was roasted and canned by the J.S. Brown Mercantile Company in 1899. The company started doing business out of a wagon in Denver, Colorado in 1861, and in 1899, they built a warehouse for their growing business across the street from the railroad station. The J.S. Brown Mercantile Company no longer exists, but the warehouse built in Denver still stands today as the Wynkoop Brewery, one of the first microbreweries in the United States. This pain balm was manufactured by the Chamberlain Company of Des Moines, Iowa, in the late 19th century. The advertising and instructions on the bottle enthusiastically claim that this medicine will cure everything from everyday muscle aches and cuts to frostbite and gout. It also claims that this product is effective for both people and horses. This artifact is a sign of how mass-produced medicines in the late 19th century were displacing traditional herbs and homeopathic remedies that people had used in New Mexico for millennia. In 1997, the Minges donated the property to the city of Albuquerque under the Albuquerque Museum's supervision. Today, Casa San Ysidro operates as a satellite of the museum in collaboration with the city of Albuquerque, state of New Mexico, Sandoval County, and village of Corrales to exhibit the Minge's incredible collection of vernacular art and architecture. This historic house museum embodies a unique history of heritage, tradition, and innovative change that New Mexicans have endured for centuries. The museum features programming in heritage arts, local celebrations, and provides examples of traditional knowledge that demonstrate a link to the lived past. The narrative of the Gutiérrez's family legacy and the Minge's commitment to preservation helped to generate an interest in keeping heritage alive within communities.